All right, so for our lesson this week, we are going to explore repetition, pattern, and color theory in the form of a festive Thanksgiving turkey. Now, how can we explore pattern and color on a turkey, you may ask? We are going to put a mandala for the feathers of the turkey. Now, a mandala is a circular pattern design that is made of concentric rings with repetition and patterns within it, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So first, we have to start with the turkey itself, and we don't want the body of the turkey to be too big so that we can fit the mandala effect and the feathers around the turkey. So we're going to start with a pear shape. And remember, if you're in my classes, we've talked about working general to specific. So the general shape of this turkey would be this funny looking pear or gourd. Then I'm going to start adding the basic shape of the beak and the wings. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the details here. And remember, when you're working general to specific, to start with lighter lines and lighter marks so that you can go back in later on and darken up the lines that you would rather have. I kind of want my turkey to be a little bit fatter. There we go. All right, so now that I have my turkey form started, I'm going to put a little dot right here, kind of halfway up the paper. And we're going to use a compass to start drawing our concentric rings for the mandala. Now, you want to make sure that when you're drawing these lines that you do not draw inside of your turkey. So wherever the turkey body would be, you would omit those marks. Now, the number of rings determines the number of patterns that you can have. So if you have a bunch of tiny rings, you can have a whole bunch of intricate patterns. I like to vary the size of the rings. It gives it a little more visual interest. So I have some larger rings and smaller rings, then maybe some really small rings. And remember that you want to keep your pencil on this dot as you draw these, otherwise your circles are going to get a little wonky. All right, so you might be asking, well, where are the feathers? And that is a valid point. So what we're going to do is make a very basic feather shape coming from the center and fanning out. And you'll notice that some of my feathers are going off of the page, and that's okay. This cropping creates a more interesting drawing. If everything is small and on the paper, you're less likely to look around the entire paper and really look at a work of art. So you'll see that I have these empty spaces here. I'm going to add a row of smaller feathers where I'll change up the pattern to help distinguish the back feathers from the front. And it's just going to help us fill in this page here. All right, so there's our basic form for the turkey. Now, you may or may not have access to Sharpies at home, but if you do, you can follow along with me. I'm actually going to outline pencil mark feathers. I think I'll even put a couple right down here. And then I'm going to go ahead and outline my turkey and fix any shapes that I find are incorrect or just not what I want. And then I'm just going to add a little detail, a few lines. Whoopsie, I wanted to highlight in his eye. And there we have a very basic turkey with a very dark eye. And I'm going to go ahead and add in some feather texture here. You can do this differently. You can do this with different lines. You could wait and just use a colored pencil. I'm going to go ahead and do this now though, because I want the texture of this turkey to stand out against the texture and color of the mandala in the background. All right, so discussing the mandala here, the mandala relies on radial symmetry, meaning that it is a circular sort of symmetry coming out from that central point to be successful. So in each of these small pencil rings that you have drawn, you will go ahead and put in just patterns of your choice. You could do zigzags, shapes, squiggles. I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in now with just some patterns. I'll just sort of pick out at random here. You can make your patterns more complex by adding shapes inside of shapes or different colors. But I'll show you more of that later. Now, as this radiates outward, you want to remember that as you approach the side of the circle, you don't want, if you're making a circular pattern, like these egg shapes that I'm making here, you don't want them all to be going straight up. You want them to follow the curve of that line. So if it helps you, you can put circles that are facing parallel with the edge of the paper in those parts of the circle, and then kind of work your way down to them or up to them. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in these patterns here, and I will catch up with you in just a moment. All right, so I've completed my patterns here. You can see in these feathers that the pattern repeats in a rotating fashion all the way around. And for these front feathers, I've created all of the patterns exactly the same. And for the back feathers, the patterns are different. This is going to help distinguish the front from the back. So I'm actually going to go ahead and take a fine point Sharpie and retrace all of the patterns that I have made, and maybe add a few little details here and there to make that pattern a little more complex. Okay, so with all of the Sharpie lines in, I went ahead and took an eraser, and I just was erasing all of these pencil marks to kind of help alleviate some of this visual confusion here with the pencil lines underneath. Now, you definitely don't have to use the Sharpie. I find that it's helpful for me because any small mistakes that I may have made with the pencil when I went over this again, I changed and altered things the way I wanted them. You'll also notice that the ring with the tiny dots I've colored in with a Sharpie, and I've added sort of a thicker line here. I'm just trying to help break up the visual areas in the mandala so that it doesn't look all the same or all like one thing. So we're going to use colored pencils to color this in, and obviously we don't want the turkey to look like a peacock. So I'm only going to use some selective colors, actually maybe even this pink. I might use the cool colors here later on in very small areas. Let's say that I put in a little stripe here and there. But for the turkey, I'm going to primarily stick to the warm colors. That's our oranges, yellows, and reds. I'm going to stick to brown as a neutral. The pink, I'm going to use sparingly just to help mix that up. And then, of course, I've got a black here. So, in keeping with the radial symmetry, you want the feathers to have the same colorings all the way around. You might consider doing a different color pattern for every other feather. I think that would look marvelous. But I'm going to stick with the same one for all of mine. So I'm going to go ahead and color in one or two of these feathers, and then I'm going to pause this and show you the finished product here. If you are going to use the cool colors with the warm, I would suggest using a complementary color. So we know that our complementary colors are opposite one another on the color wheel. If you're going to add that in, say if I'm using this red here, I would add a little green in, because complementary colors pop. And you want an area of nice high contrast there. So when talking about pattern here, I've made my pattern in lines, but I'm also going to begin making patterns in color, and that can help add to a really successful drawing when you have patterns on patterns of different kinds. You just don't want to go too crazy with it, because then the composition gets what they call busy, when there's too much visual information for the viewer to look at. So how I was talking about switching up the patterns in between these feathers, I'm going to do a very small pattern change here. I'm going to reverse this from black, red, pink, red. I'm going to put the black on the inside and work my way back out. And I'm going to alternate that for every feather as I go around. Oh, that looked purple to me, but we're just going to color right over top of that. So I'm going to use my purple sparingly in here. And in just a small area, it should not look too rainbow. And then, of course, the best color to help that pop would be the yellow, because yellow is the complement of purple here. All right, so I've gone ahead and finished all of the coloring and the patterns. You can see that I've alternated some patterns in the ends of these, and I've sort of kept the middle more or less the same here. I didn't want it to be too confusing around the turkey here, which I'm going to color in. But I think for the color scheme that we used with, just a few limited colors, this was definitely very successful. So I know that turkeys are in reality not just a brown color, but if we become too detailed with the turkey itself, it's really going to start to blend in with the background, and we just kind of want to keep that separate. So I'm going to go ahead and lay down a brown here. And you notice that I'm not coloring in very hard. That's because I'm going to go back in and shape this up and shade it with some black and add a few other accent colors here. We know the gizzard here is red. And under where these layers of feathers are, I'm just going to add a little bit of shading here. Going to help give our bird dimension. I'm going to shade around one side and the bottom. That's going to sort of help him look a little more round, a little less flat, like it was laying right down on the surface. Add some red to the legs. Just go back in. Add a little more value. I actually am not sure what color the beak is. Yellow does not seem quite right, but that is what I am going with without a reference picture here. All right, and there you have it. If you wanted to, you could probably go in with a really light neutral, like a really light brown, and go in with the background here, but I think he looks pretty good, making him pop out against the white of the background. So that's all I have for you for this lesson, and I will see you next time.